just to survive the winter. Before the madness, there was magnificence. The German Empire in 1914 was a colossus of steel and science. Its cities hummed with factories. Its universities produced Nobel Prize winners. The German mark was backed by gold and respected across Europe. When you held the mark, you held power. The Kaiser's army was the most disciplined fighting force on earth. The Navy challenged British supremacy on the seas. 2 million men marched to war in August 1914 with flowers in their rifle barrels. The government told them they'd be home by Christmas. Victory was certain. The treasury was full. But beneath the surface, the foundation was rotting. War is expensive, more expensive than any politician will admit. The German government made a catastrophic gamble. Instead of raising taxes to fund the war, they borrowed billions upon billions of marks in war bonds. They sold these bonds to their own citizens with a simple promise: Germany will win. The defeated enemy will pay everything back. It was a national Ponzi scheme. 4 years of industrialized slaughter followed. The war consumed men, steel, and money at a rate never seen before. By 1918, Germany had spent 164 billion marks on the war. The gold reserves were gone. The productive capacity was shattered. 2 million German soldiers were dead. And then came the signature on the train car. November 11th, 1918, a forest in France. German representatives signed the armistice. The guns fell silent. The empire that was supposed to win had lost. The Kaiser fled to Holland in the middle of the night. The throne was empty. Revolution swept through Berlin and Munich. Sailors mutinied. Workers formed councils. The old order evaporated in 6 weeks. Out of this chaos, frightened politicians created the Weimar Republic. It was a democracy nobody wanted, and it inherited a balance sheet soaked in blood and red ink. The new government's first problem was the war bonds. Millions of ordinary Germans had bought them. School teachers, shopkeepers, widows. They had trusted their government. Now those bonds were worth nothing because Germany had lost. The government faced a choice: default on the bonds and admit the entire war was a theft, or honor them and drown in debt. They chose to drown. The second problem walked through the door in June 1919. It was called the Treaty of Versailles. Article 231 declared Germany solely responsible for the war. It was the legal foundation for what came next: reparations. The Allied powers wanted cash. Specifically, they wanted 132 billion gold marks. Let that number sink in. It was more than Germany's entire annual economic output. It was designed to take generations to pay. The Allies didn't want marks printed on paper. They wanted payment in gold and dollars and pounds. Real money. They knew what was coming. The Weimar government was trapped. They needed to pay reparations to the Allies. They needed to pay pensions to millions of war widows and crippled veterans. They needed to pay for schools, police, and roads. And they had no money. A strong government would have raised taxes. They could have seized the wealth of the industrialists who profited from the war. They could have confiscated estates from the Junker aristocrats. But Weimar was weak. Communists controlled parts of Bavaria. Right-wing militias roamed the streets. The government was terrified of triggering a civil war, so they chose the coward's way out. They turned on the printing presses. At first, the damage was slow. During the war, Germany had already abandoned the gold standard. $1 bought 4 marks in 1914. By 1918, $1 bought 8 marks. Prices were rising, but life continued. People grumbled but adapted. Throughout 1919 and 1920, the government printed more. They used the new paper marks to pay teachers and bureaucrats. They bought foreign currency on the open market to pay reparations. Each month more paper flooded the system. Each month the mark lost a little more value. By 1921, $1 bought 60 marks, then 90, then 300. It was a slow bleed. Bread cost more. Rent went up. Savings accounts bought less. But the currency still functioned. People still trusted it. The fever hadn't broken yet. Germany tried to negotiate. They sent delegations to London and Paris. They begged for a moratorium, a pause in the reparations. Let us rebuild, they said. Let the economy recover. Britain was sympathetic. A bankrupt Germany couldn't buy British exports, but France was unmoved. France had borrowed billions from America to fight the war. They needed German gold to pay back those loans, and they wanted revenge. By 1922, Germany missed a shipment, telegraph poles and coal. It was a small default. But France used it as an excuse. January 1923. French and Belgian soldiers marched into Germany, not toward Berlin, toward the Ruhr Valley. The Ruhr was the industrial heart of the nation. It held the coal mines and steel mills that powered everything. The French plan was brutal in its simplicity. If Germany won't pay, we'll take it. They occupied the mines. They would seize the coal and steel directly. The German army, reduced to 100,000 men by Versailles, could do nothing. The Weimar government was humiliated. They couldn't fight back, so they chose economic warfare. The government in Berlin ordered passive resistance. They told every miner, every steel worker, every railway man to stop. Do not work for the French. Not a single lump of coal. It was a general strike. The industrial heart of Europe stopped beating. French soldiers stood guard over silent factories and empty pits. German workers stayed home in defiance. Patriotism surged. But there was a problem, a catastrophic problem. Millions of workers in the Ruhr had no income. How would they eat? The government made a promise. Berlin would pay every striking worker's wages, full salary for doing nothing. It was the most expensive act of spite in human history. Where would the money come from? The printing presses in Berlin roared. This wasn't gradual inflation anymore. This was a flood. Billions of new marks every week. On one side, the money supply exploded. On the other side, because the Ruhr had stopped producing, the supply of goods collapsed. Coal, steel, machinery, all gone. You had oceans of new money chasing fewer and fewer products. Basic economics took over. Prices detonated. In January 1923, $1 bought 18,000 marks. By April, it was 24,000. By June, 100,000. The currency began to die. A new behavior emerged, the flight from currency. As soon as people received their wages, they ran, literally sprinted to the nearest store. It didn't matter what they bought. Shoes, potatoes, nails, anything physical. Because physical objects held value, paper rotted by the hour. Money became a hot potato. Nobody wanted to hold it. The velocity of money hit warp speed. Cash moved through the economy like a virus. By summer, the numbers became absurd. The Imperial Printing Office ran 24 hours a day, tens of thousands of workers cutting and stacking paper. They outsourced to private companies. Soon, 130 printing firms across Germany were churning out banknotes. They couldn't design new plates fast enough. They took old 1,000 mark notes and stamped 1 million over them in red ink. The exchange rate fell into the abyss. July, $1, 350,000 marks. August, 4.6 million marks. The banking system broke. Banks didn't have vault space for the sheer volume of paper. People carried money in backpacks, then suitcases, then wheelbarrows. There's a story from this time. A man took a wheelbarrow full of cash to buy bread. He left it outside the bakery for one moment. When he returned, someone had dumped the money on the street. They stole the wheelbarrow. The wheelbarrow had value. The paper was garbage, the social fabric ripped apart. The people destroyed were the ones who played by the rules, the middle class, the savers, the pensioners, people who worked for 40 years and saved for retirement watched it vanish in weeks. A bank account that could buy a house in 1921 couldn't buy a postage stamp by late 1923. Widows on fixed or pensions starved. Landlords collected rent that couldn't buy an egg, but the gamblers won. Borrowers wiped out their debts for nothing. If you borrowed 5 million marks in 1922 to buy a factory, by summer 1923 you could repay it by selling a teacup. Industrialists who understood borrowed billions in paper to buy real assets. Land, machines, mines. They repaid later with worthless cash. Men like Hugo Stenz became kings. They bought empires for free, society inverted. Hard work and thrift became jokes. Why work a 12-hour day when your week's wages couldn't buy a tram ticket home? Crime exploded. Farmers guarded potato fields with shotguns. City dwellers streamed into the countryside to steal food. Barter returned. Doctors were paid in sausages. Needles and thread were worth more than cash. By September 1923, the slide became freefall. The exchange rate hit 100 million marks to the dollar. The government was losing control. Communist uprisings erupted in Hamburg and Saxony. Separatists declared independence in the Rhineland. The French were still in the Ruhr. Winter was coming, and the nation was out of money. By autumn 1923, Germany entered the surreal. In October, $1 bought 25 billion marks. In November, 4.2 trillion marks. A loaf of bread cost 200 billion marks. A single egg, 80 billion. Prices rose by the hour. A man went into a cafe. The menu said coffee cost 5,000 marks. He drank it. 30 minutes later, the bill was 8,000 marks. The currency had depreciated while he sat there. Workers demanded payment twice daily. Wives met husbands at factory gates at lunch to grab cash and sprint to shops before the afternoon price spike. The physical reality of money became absurd. The notes were just paper. People used them for anything but commerce. Winter 1923 was cold. Coal was scarce because the French held the Ruhr. People looked at stacks of billion-mark notes. They realized something. Those notes couldn't buy coal, but they could burn. So they did the logical thing. They threw money into the stove. It was cheaper to burn cash than to buy firewood with cash. Children used banknotes as building blocks. Others used them as toilet paper. Some wallpapered rooms with them. The German mark was literally trash. The psychological trauma was permanent. Society runs on trust in the future. Money is a promise. You work today because you believe that money will be worth something tomorrow. When that trust dies, civilization reverts. The death rate among infants and elderly soared. Malnutrition, cold, tuberculosis spread through unheated tenements. Suicide rates spiked. People who couldn't feed their children despite working themselves to exhaustion gave up. In this atmosphere, extremism flourished. When the system failed so completely, people listened to voices from the edge. The communists screamed this was capitalism's inevitable collapse. The solution was Soviet Germany. On the far right, new violent voices rose. They blamed the November criminals who signed Versailles. They blamed the Jews. They blamed international bankers. In Bavaria, a virtually unknown agitator named Adolf Hitler was gathering crowds. He watched the chaos from Munich with glee. He knew hungry, desperate people were ripe. He told them Weimar democracy was a puppet. He said they were deliberately destroying Germany. He promised to restore order, to make Germany strong again. To a middle class that democracy had just impoverished, he started to make sense. November 8, 1923, Hitler fired a pistol into the ceiling of a Munich beer hall. He declared a national revolution. The beer hall putsch. He would march on Berlin and seize power. The coup was a disaster. Bavarian police opened fire the next day. Hitler fled and was arrested for treason. The immediate Nazi threat was crushed, but the economic crisis had reached terminal velocity. The printing presses physically couldn't print zeros fast enough. The machinery of a modern industrial nation had stopped. Germany was on the brink of disintegration. Something had to change immediately, or the country would cease to exist. In the darkest hour, a new government took charge, led by Chancellor Gustav Stresemann. Stresemann was pragmatic. He knew the bleeding had to stop. His first move was political. He called off passive resistance in the Ruhr. He told workers to go back. It was a humiliation, an admission France had won. Nationalists screamed traitor. But Stresemann knew the country couldn't survive paying millions to do nothing. His second move was financial. He brought in Hjalmar Schacht, a brilliant, arrogant financial wizard. Schacht knew the paper mark was beyond saving. Trust was gone. They needed a new currency. But what would back it? Germany had no gold. The Allies had taken it all, so Schacht performed a psychological magic trick. November 15th, 1923, he introduced the Rentenmark. He announced it was backed not by gold, but by German real estate and agricultural land. The government took a theoretical mortgage on every farm and factory to back the notes. Economically, this was smoke and mirrors. If it failed, they couldn't actually seize every farm, but psychologically, it worked. Desperate people chose to believe. Schacht set the exchange rate. One new Rentenmark equaled 1 trillion old paper marks. Crucially, Schacht did what previous governments refused. He stopped the printing presses. The supply of Rentenmarks was strictly limited. The government could no longer print to pay bills. If they didn't have tax revenue, they couldn't spend. It was brutal shock therapy. The government slashed spending. They fired 25% of all civil servants. They raised taxes. The miracle of the Rentenmark happened almost overnight. Prices stopped rising. Food reappeared in shops because farmers would trade for money that held value. The wheelbarrows disappeared. The hyperinflation was over. The fever broke. Germany entered the golden 20s. American banks began lending massive amounts under the Dawes Plan. This American cash helped Germany pay reparations and funded a boom. Berlin became the cultural capital of Europe. Cabaret, art, science. It seemed that the Republic had survived, but the patient hadn't recovered. It had only stabilized. The crisis was over, but the psychological damage was permanent. The stabilization cemented the losses. If you had 50,000 marks saved in 1918, enough for a comfortable retirement when you exchanged it in December 1923, you received a fraction of a single Rentenmark, a few pfennigs. Your life savings couldn't buy a crumb of bread. The middle class had been expropriated. They felt betrayed by democracy. They followed the rules, saved money, were loyal citizens. The democratic government had robbed them. Meanwhile, debtors, speculators, war profiteers kept their gains. The injustice burned into the German soul. This resentment was toxic soil. When Adolf Hitler emerged from prison a year later, he found a changed country. The immediate crisis had passed. People worked again. His radical message didn't resonate strongly during the stable late 20s. The Nazi Party remained fringe, but trust in the system was gone. Germans now knew their government could destroy their livelihood overnight through incompetence. They knew democracy could mean starvation and chaos. The Weimar Republic lived on borrowed time and borrowed American money. It was a house on a cracked foundation. The hyperinflation didn't put Hitler in power immediately, but it destroyed the immune system of German society. It weakened the middle class that should have resisted extremism. So when the next crisis hit, the Great Depression in 1929, when American loans dried up and unemployment soared, Germans had no patience left. They remembered the wheelbarrows of 1923. They remembered burning cash for heat. This time, when a man with a strange mustache promised to burn the system down and build a new order of strength and stability, they didn't just listen. They voted for him. Germany didn't make its final reparations payment until October 3, 2010, 92 years after the armistice. 3 generations passed before the ledger was balanced. The children who burned banknotes as toys in 1923 were dead. Their grandchildren made the final payment. Think about that. Think about how one government's decision to print money instead of raising taxes condemned a nation for nearly a century. The lesson of Weimar is carved in financial stone. Sovereignty is solvency. When you can't balance the books, someone else will balance them for you, and the price they demand will be paid in blood, hunger, and the ashes of your currency. This is the history they don't teach in schools. This is the economic truth behind the political theater. The next time you hear a government promise to print its way out of trouble, remember the German mother in 1923. Remember her standing at the stove with billion-mark notes in her hands. Remember the choice she made. Because when money becomes worthless, civilization burns it for warmth. And in those flames, monsters are born. If you want to stay ahead, if you want to understand the economic forces that shape history before they shape your future, subscribe to this channel, because the ledger always balances, and someone always pays the bill.